Ladies and gentlemen, our sound is back with us. Let me open a special council meeting, City Council, Saturday, 2019. And that took care of item 1 on our agenda. And item number 2, I'll ask Clay Pearson to take over. It's the purpose of our meeting. Your mic's not on. And you are our main speaker for today.
Right. More for the record. Okay. So good morning, Mayor and Council, and all that might be watching or tuning in later. Today is our kickoff for our FY20 budget process. Seems like we're just here, but we again are looking forward to another productive year in serving and building this community. The recommended budget was delivered to you about a week and a half ago. So hopefully you've had some time to look at that and generate some of the questions. This morning is frankly more of us presenting that formally in a couple of different sections. One, we'll do the general fund as a group and then pause for any comments or questions from council, particularly for anything you want us to look into deeper and report back to you at your next designated budget meeting, I believe a week from Monday. And then after that, we'll look at all the other funds that the city operates and then do the same process for any questions. So when the theme I built the budget around and our team looked at what's next, that's a question that comes up quite frequently in this community. We've all been very accustomed to the breakneck speed, high growth, high development, high construction. Those will continue, but as we all anticipate, not at quite the same pace going forward. And so as we mature as a city and a suburb, we want to make sure that we do things that are investments for the long haul and keeping Pearland the most competitive, attractive place possible to continue its success, albeit in a different form. So getting right into some of the things, the numbers, a couple of slides that really help tell the tale. And this one's on our taxable value. This is very important from us from a financial perspective as tax base drives property tax, which is a large part of our revenue to take care of operations, and it drives the entirety almost of our debt service fund. And so you can see the steady increases there. And when we got the final numbers from the appraisal districts, it shows a 4.3% increase from the prior year. And that's positive and good. It is slightly below the 5% that we'd anticipated. And so it's just something else that we want to keep an eye on. But again, it's another sign of us maturing, and the base as it grows, it'll be harder to grow that at a higher pace from that point. And then the other piece of that is the rate that goes on top of the base, and this shows the fluctuations of that. We are recommending the rollback rate, which is a 3.2 cent increase overall, and that is necessitated by a couple of things we'll get into as we go along here. But you can see that ratio between the operations and the debt service and how that's changed over time, and the rate also follows a little bit of how the base is growing. Big picture, we need to take note that the recommended budget is balanced structurally. We haven't always been able to say that as we've grown into our current form. Revenues are even with expenditures. We are also significantly adding to fund balance. We've achieved earlier than anticipated our target of the 60 days of expenditures. So that's another positive. And the budget, as you'll see, is built upon investments in our people who are doing the work and delivering the services that we rely upon. On the sales tax side, the other piece of our revenue that's put into the budget with a 1% growth rate, conservative number, but actually reflecting the last several months that we've seen in the growth. And some of it may have been Harvey early on in the comparisons, but we're just looking at, as the economy nationally in the metro area is going through its changes. We don't want to assume too much more than that, and we'll be able to make any adjustments at mid-year. But the budget is based upon this 1% sales tax, and that's followed in the PEDC operating budget, which gets the bulk of its revenue from its 1/2 cent as well. So a couple things. This year we've shared the annotated worksheet, that we get from the appraisal district that drives the calculations from for the effective rate and the rollback rate. It's a very complex calculation. We've annotated it this year, partially for our peace of mind and trying to understand it, but also for the council and public who want to take a look at that. I think we've done a good job of noting the big numbers that are in there. The debt service rate is increased slightly to 43.5 cents. That is below what we had anticipated in the discussions for the new 2019 bond issue, that when the council and the public had the information for whether to buy off on that additional 2019 projects with the bond issue. That, I believe, was anticipated like a 5-cent increase over time. And so we will be going up from that, again, conservatively, but that is reflected in this budget. If we were to try to go to the state's effective tax rate, we'd need to find $2.7 million of expenditures to compensate for the revenue loss. And just for comparison purposes, the current tax rate, we'd have to find $3.7 million in expenditures. So not a lot of flexibility, frankly, with anything significant in terms of those rates. I will mention, too, the top bullet when I talk about the annotated worksheet that gave us the effective rate. The first page in the budget is also something we get directly from the appraisal district, and that's the state mandated calculations. It provides some confusing numbers, and they also require that we put it into our budget as you see it there as is. So you're not going to find numbers that tie out to that, and the worksheet as well, I think, causes more confusion than clarity from the state. This is a table we've used for the last several years, and I think it's instructive to try to understand what's going on with the different components of the property tax rate and what those levels bring us in terms of administrative fee from the TIRZ and just the general property tax revenue. And again, whereas last year we were able to come in at the effective rate, there wasn't a lot of difference in that calculation. This year we're recommending going to the rollback rate that's shown in the far right there. We've also, for the last few years, we've had a set of 10 actual property tax bills around the community, homestead, single-family homes, and this shows a different effect. Rate and the city is one piece of that. The one on the left just shows, for comparative purposes, what a zero growth rate property tax change would do. But as we show in the other examples, the actual experience varies depending upon the valuation calculations from the appraisal districts. So with no change, that'd be $58 for the year from the city side. And again, have to emphasize that depending on where you are, the city is between 25 and 30% of the total tax bill right now. So the bulk of that goes towards public education and then the county that you're in. And then here's just some other examples, and this shows one that's had a higher growth on the valuation, that example 10. And then for the seniors that have frozen values, they benefit from that significantly, and that's frozen and shows no change for that. So getting into some of the top-level budget priorities, again, we're a people organization in all senses of the word. We have a 2% COLA, cost of living across the board in there, and even 2% rolls up to about $1.2 million across all funds. So our workforce rely upon a significant piece of the budget, and that's shown in that. So wish we could do more, frankly, but the 2% is what we can afford in this budget. We also have the step increase and then the standard longevity. I've also included and recommended an additional one-time pay that's sort of built upon the calculation from a longevity pay, whereas that's $4 per month of service. Would recommend and ask that we include in here $2 additional in December, so that people would see something demonstrable. We can afford this, and then they would, since we're able to do the 2%, this would be something else I think we can do for the staff. And then we've tried to spend more time and be even more thoughtful about the professional development expenditures. Everybody's across the organizations required certifications, training, all the police, fire, water, sewer, everything, all that rolls up to about $1.7 million in professional development. Public safety is the biggest chunk of our general fund, representing over half of those expenditures. We have 4 new positions in the police department, 2 officers and 2 911 telecommunication operators. That was one of the priorities that council recall in that study that was identified. And then we are also continuing our continuous onboarding. And in the fire department, we have 13 additional positions in this budget, and that will allow us to open Fire Station 8 in summer next year on north side of Shadow Creek and be able to staff 1 ambulance and 1 apparatus. And then we would continue that in subsequent budgets to be able to add the other apparatus and fully operation that station. Just touching on, we've peeled off the capital improvement program itself, and council spent a good amount of time a few weeks ago going through that, and you'll see the resolution for adopting that on Monday night. But the majority of our capital improvements that are reflected on the expenditures for this upcoming fiscal year are in the Enterprise Water and Sewer Fund, $387 million of that. While construction costs, I don't think we can say anymore that's a great time to be doing that it's demonstrably less than usual. We are still able to finance that work for very, very low interest rates. We had very competitive, positive rates for the city in terms of investing those in our last sale. And then on the other side of our capital improvements, non-enterprise, a lot of that's for the road extensions, everything from McCard Road, and then also the 2019 voter-approved bond issue projects, things like the Bailey Road, additional bridge crossing over the railroad tracks. You'll see a design contract coming up for that again on Monday. Our projects teams have been very aggressive. We promised you that we would get after those projects, and that's been proven true. On the maintenance side of our infrastructure, unfortunately, it's a repeating story here, but we are able to put into this budget $650 for street improvements and about $460,000 for sidewalks. The good news is that's an increase over last year. Bad news is it's woefully less than what's been identified if we want to try to keep our pavement condition index steady where it's at, continue to make those investments, and also below if we want to try to cut into the backlog of sidewalk maintenance requests and things that we've observed all around town. So that heat map just shows a couple different areas of where the sidewalk reports have been. Parks and Recreation, we do have in that 2019 bond issue the annual recapitalization reinvestment in parks equipment. We're happy and we've got a position in here to be able to staff the Independence Park and program that and make sure it realizes its full potential. And this is also the first full year of the staffing at the Dolores Fenwick Nature Center, which has been off to a great start. And both those positions are included in here. One thing that I wanted to highlight that's not in this budget, but we need to keep in our minds, is that there's going to be about $1.8 million in reimbursements from our Hurricane Harvey expenditures, emergency protective measures. FEMA, as a declared disaster area, will be reimbursing us, and staff, primarily Mr. Hardy, has been working for the last 2 years on assembling the paperwork and the requirements that are all part of that to put that in, and we're on the verge of being able to hit enter, that we can get that moved up the chain. They've changed their process a little bit so that hopefully there's more front-end work, and we'll see this check sooner rather than later. Optimistically, we could see some obligation from the feds. I saw a news release just yesterday from League City where they were able to get theirs obligated. So when that does come in, there's 2 one-time expenditures that we're recommending that we need to do that we get covered with this money. First is the asset management software, next phase from the general fund side, and then an update to our comprehensive plan. We need to complete both of those, and this would be an appropriate funding source for that. And then the balance bulk of that, we suggest we put early in the year into more streets and sidewalks and vehicle replacements. So whenever we are comfortable that money's certain and we can book it as revenue, we come to you for a budget amendment to be able to invest in those. So that's the slide previous when I talked about streets and sidewalks. Need to keep this in mind, that there is some silver lining or hope on the horizon that we can able to do some more significant things in upcoming FY20. On the debt service rate, as we always do, we look out multi-year and look at our capital improvement program and the debt issuance financing that's necessary to support that. As I mentioned, the debt service rate for upcoming FY20 up about a half cent below what had been projected, but then conservatively looking out in the future years, up to that 4.875 kind of rate. So not out of line with what had been anticipated, but definitely something that will continue to work and try to bring down as we have traditionally in the last few years. There's a couple other big things, even beyond the FY20, that I wanted to highlight for council, and that is the TIRZ fund and the impact on the city positively in these aspects. The city fronted the construction many years ago for the Broadway extension, and the TIRZ is performing so well that the projections are that we'll get that reimbursement for that. It wasn't always a certainty that we would get that back at all, but now the way things are going in the TIRZ, we expect that we can see that reimbursement to the general fund in 2022. So that does provide another very bright spot, positive for us, and we've suggested all along that that gets designated, if not all, in large part to the motor pool and the fleet fund, so that that can get set up for the city's long future and capitalize that and get that where it needs to be. And then another thing that wasn't necessarily anticipated in the past, but we seized the opportunity with the TIRZ, and we're going to get about $50 million worth of public improvement projects that would either not have gotten done or would have been added to just the general city obligations and debt through the TIRZ. So that's the great news. The other piece of that is that we have to finance that on the interim and the finance and the before the reimbursement comes in. You can't get the reimbursement until the work is done, and so that's just a reality of how the TIRZ works. And so some of those certificates of obligation you saw, we put into a short-term note, I think 7 years. So we'll pay those back when the TIRZ gets funded, but in the meantime, we have to finance that, and that is added into the debt service rate that you saw previously. And then I think it's still too early to make too many projections, predictions, but one thing that's fact is that the TIRZ number 2, Shadow Creek, will expire in 2029, and so we need to start thinking in the next few years about what that means in terms of operations from the administrative fee that comes into the city, and then just how that affects the debt service rate, because all of that value will be then coming on to the general books of the city, and we'll be able to use that to pay the rest of our debt service. That's another positive thing. The state legislature in their last biannual session did what they do best, and they made changes that negatively affect cities. The new rollback rate is a fact that that's going to be 3.5% for FY21. And so this year is the last year that the 8% will be effective. With 3.5%, we have to keep our eye on how that affects for the future, not what we've already planned and built into the FY20 budget, but future staffing for Station 8, building our general fund balances so we can take care of ourselves for the next hurricane, fleet replacements, streets and sidewalks, and then just generally new staff. So that's all of that's just something we've got to keep in our minds, and not again for 20, but for budget years beyond that. We're good for what's in this 20 budget. So again, I'll close my section and turn over to Mr. McCarter, but just want to thank this council and prior councils for making Pearland such a great place to work and be. Indicators for quality of life and service levels, et cetera, remain positive, but rest assured we're not going to sit on that, and we're going to continue to improve and stretch ourselves and try to get better and better and stay competitive and adapt to whatever comes next. So I will turn it over to Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson, and good morning, Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is John McCarter, Assistant Finance Director. Before we dive into the nuts and bolts today, just a few housekeeping items. For anybody in the audience or watching at home, you can visit pearlandtx.gov/FY20 budget. That's in the lower right-hand corner of this presentation. We have all the materials from today's meeting, as well as both budget books and all the early budget input session materials posted on that website. We'll post follow-ups from this meeting there as well. Second, on the lower left-hand corner of the page, or the slides, you will notice the page number references in the budget book itself. If you want to dig deeper, we put those references in there where applicable. Lastly, I wanted to note on the schedule, those of you who have been through this process before, today will be very similar to previous years, with one exception. The capital improvement project or plan was presented at the last regular council meeting. We'll be coming back on Monday, so we will not be discussing that today, but that will be on the regularly scheduled city council agenda for the 12th on Monday. I'd also like to take the time to thank staff for the work that they've done, in particular Neely Walker, our senior budget analyst, Rachel Winslow, our budget analyst, as well as Cynthia Pearson, our finance director, and Rhonda Doherty, our assistant finance director. The budget team did a lot of work to get to where we are today. Lastly, and probably most importantly, I wanted to thank all the staff that are here today. When we kick off the budget, we use the word ownership a lot. That's just a euphemism for more work for these guys, and they step up and do a lot behind the scenes to get us where we are today. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to management for your leadership to get us to this point. Also, thank you to Mayor and Council, not just for giving up your Saturday morning today, but for your leadership and guidance over the next 2 months as we work towards adopting this budget. We quite literally could not do this without you. Before we dive in, I think it's important to set the stage with our 6 strategic priorities. We talk about these a lot. When we report out on a weekly basis on our Thursday packets, we do so around these 6 buckets. When we do our early budget input session, we talk around these 6 buckets. This budget, again, is built around these 6 strategic priorities and should be seen as a continuation of those conversations that we've had before, trying to further these 6 priorities to help us serve the citizenry and the community as best we can. So to start with a kind of basic question, what is a budget? Seems a little bit intuitive, but if you dive in, first and foremost, it's really a policy document. Earlier this year, we brought our comprehensive financial policies for your consideration and adoption. This is kind of the continuation of that. This is that put into a solid plan. Secondly, it's a financial plan. Quite obviously, there's a lot of numbers in this book. This is kind of the nuts and bolts behind how the city operates. Brings me to number 3. This is an operations guide. I myself keep my budget book on my desk, and I reference it almost daily. While I assume most staff don't do that, what gets adopted by council does get put into our financial system, and every check, every invoice, every purchase order, it's that general ledger. So we use this quite literally every single day. Lastly, and most importantly probably to our residents, this is a communication device. It's a big, thick book, but we do our best here and in information shared out to the public to communicate what's in this big, thick book and what we're doing with their tax dollars to make sure we're being transparent and clear about how we're using those funds. Hitting on some of the general fund highlights. So on the general fund side, what we do every year is ask for supplemental requests from all the department heads. Then we get everybody in a room and sit down for 4 or 5 hours and rank them from 1 to roughly 50. This year we got $8.8 million worth of requests. These are just a few of them. You can see the full list is the first page in your appendix. And the general fund highlights you can find on page 1 in book 1 of the highlights section. First, we see the continuation of a program called Continuous Onboarding. This is 13 firefighters for our fire department. This includes the promotions as well to get fire station number 8 up and running in the spring. This allows us to run 1 medic unit and 1 apparatus out of that location. Looking at FY20, we'll be looking to bring 13 more on board to get that 2nd apparatus up and running as well. We also have 2 sworn officers for the police department, 1 officer and 1 lieutenant. They will at least initially start out in the criminal investigations division. We also have 2 telecommunication operators scheduled for 6 months in the police department. This is a continuation of recommendations from the Berkshire study and an emphasis from our police department to make sure that we have the support behind the scenes to make sure officers are getting where they need to go. Lastly, on the safe community, a cybersecurity specialist. If you've been reading the news lately, cybersecurity in local government has been a bit of a hot button issue. This position will allow us to get ahead of that curve, make sure that we're keeping our systems safe and out of hands that would do harm to the city. Worth noting, this was the #1 ranked request in our director supplemental ranking. Mr. Pearson mentioned at the outset, but we do have $400,000 additional for streets and sidewalk funding. That brings us up to roughly $654,000 for streets, $459,000 for sidewalks. Obviously short of the $5.5 million combined that we're looking for, but a step in that direction. Lastly, on the highlights, we have a traffic crew and a bucket truck for the traffic division. This is to maintain the span wires over the streets in the city and do a lot of other maintenance work. I will say over the course of a number of years, this will end up paying for itself by bringing some of the work we would normally contract out in-house, which is cheaper than contracting that service out. Looking at Engage Community, kind of a behind-the-scenes software, but one that will impact our residents, is our GovQA public records solution. Essentially what this does is centralize all of our information requests. Right now those are managed by our city secretary's office really via email. This would centralize that and allow us to turn that information over quickly for those FOIA requests that come in. Mr. Pearson hit on the COLA, the step pay, and the longevity, but that's $1.6 million in additional funds across all of our funds investing in our employees this year. We also have a management assistant built into the budget that we started, I believe it was roughly, beginning of this fiscal year, geared towards our high performance organization and supporting those key functions for us to be moving in that high performance direction. Lastly, on the Parks and Recreations and Events, we have a Parks Mower package for $77,000. This is the first year of a 3-year lease to own package. This essentially gets some larger equipment out there to allow them to be a little bit more efficient with the people that they have on the grounds. Obviously, opening new parks, this will allow them to keep up with that without adding new staff. Always important to talk about what we have not included in this budget. Obviously, we have to work within the limitations that we have. The third time today, but we needed an additional $4.3 million to maintain that pavement condition index. We're lucky to have a pretty high index, relatively speaking, but that investment is necessary to maintain that quality infrastructure for our residents. I mentioned the number 8.8 in the initial highlights. 6.8 million of that was not funded. If you look at that list, it's nearly entirely staff. That remains our #1 priority here. We have broken out here the unfunded staff for each classification, leading the way public safety with 27. Notably, the second apparatus for Fire Station 8 is being planned to be implemented in FY21. We have 5 public works staff, 9 parks and recreation, and 10 internal service department staff. That would be IT, finance, HR, city secretary, the like. We also discussed the 3% COLA at the early budget input session. In this budget, we included a 2% COLA. It's roughly $602,000 across all funds that we saved that. Now, Mr. Pearson mentioned the one-time pay in his intro. The thought was to kind of at least provide a little bit of a benefit there in lieu of this 3%. And then lastly, probably the scariest number on here, the $15.4 million eligible general fund replacement vehicles. That's the amount of vehicles that meet our basic requirement criteria that are not being replaced here this year. Staffing highlights. So this is the list of all the new staff that we are adding this year in the general fund. I won't go over what we already talked about, but I will highlight some of the internal service departments are gaining some needed staff, that being in finance, HR, IT, and communications. 3 new staff in the Parks and Recreation department. Mr. Pearson noted the Independence Parks coordinator, who will also do events coordination for other facilities as well. It won't just be Independence Park. And then the remaining 2 positions, it's worth noting, Parks has identified offsetting cost reductions. So those are 0 impact to the general fund budget, and we can add staff there. Lastly, the project coordinator for our capital projects division, obviously very aggressive CIP they're undertaking, and this needed position will be funded using those capital funds for those projects. So looking citywide, this is inclusive of our enterprise fund as well, but we are looking to add a net of 35 FTEs this year. That's inclusive of new positions and reclassifications within this budget. You can see the largest chunk, public safety, followed by public works, parks and recreation, general government on down. That's breakout has not changed much over the years. Switching over to the revenue side of things, Mr. Pearson mentioned the 1% increase to sales tax revenue. That equates to roughly $230,000. This is less than we have budgeted in past years. But just given the relative slowdown in that increase that we've seen over the last few months, we thought this was a conservative estimate. If you saw the latest sales tax report that came out on Thursday, we showed a decrease in the net payment to the city of sales tax, but the current period growth was actually 0.5%, so we did see a little growth there on our current sales. It was some audit collections that threw it off. But that rolling 12% remains around 1%, so we want to stick there just to be conservative. Looking at new single-family housing permits, this not only links to revenue for our permits and licenses, but this is also new value coming on for future years. You can see we've seen a precipitous drop since kind of the peak in 2015. I will note that 2015 is probably the exception, not the rule. We continue to see growth in both commercial and residential across the city. And on my end, the budget end, we have adjusted to meet these numbers, so we're not reducing our budget at all to hit this. We're actually, I think, on track to either meet or exceed our projections for FY19. In FY20, we were relatively conservative and actually just kept it flat. So even though we see these going down, we are confident we've controlled for that within this budget. Looking at the revenue changes, this year for the first time, I believe, the property tax line item is the largest in this budget. You see that increase there of roughly $2.7 million, the $230,000 increase on sales and use tax. On our charges for services, there's really two things driving the increase there. The first and largest is the revenue from the emergency services districts that are new this fiscal year. Our estimated revenue from that is $782,000. That's compensation for the city providing fire services into those districts, which we had previously done at no charge. We also saw a $432,000 increase to the TIRZ administration fee, which is driven by property tax as well. That just comes back to us, 64% of that revenue as a charge for service. You'll note a few of these are either staying flat or going down. Starting with franchise fees, the legislature did pass a new law that those providers that provide both telephone and cable service do not have to pay both of those franchise fees. So they're required to pay the higher of the two. So we controlled for that roughly $100,000 drop. We'll keep an eye on that and see what the impact is. License and permits, I mentioned, are staying exactly flat with this year's budget. I think the difference might be $5,000. Our fines and forfeitures, we have a slight drop budgeted. For the first time in, I believe, 3 to 4 years, we saw an increase in these fines and forfeitures this year. We don't want to bank on that happening again. So again, just to be conservative, we have that reduced slightly. And then lastly, our miscellaneous services dropping just a tad, and that's due to the ambulance services reimbursement we get from Medicaid. We have a preliminary number in there now that should change at mid-year. Looking at the expenditure side, obviously no secret that our public safety, police and fire functions lead the way with most of our budget, followed by public works, general government, that being mainly internal service and administrative divisions, and then parks and rec, we see a slight increase there, along with community services, that with our communications, city secretary, and municipal court, and then our transfers there as well, going up slightly this year. I will say that we do have lease fees built in for the first time this year, which you can see on this next slide. Our motor pool fund transfers. That, if you remember last year, we started our motor pool fund for the first time at $0 fund balance. This year it'll be around $600,000 by the end of the fiscal year, building that up so we can build that program to replace vehicles as they come on board. But every vehicle that was replaced last year, both general fund and enterprise fund, now has a lease fee, which we get by basically dividing the replacement cost by the number of years it should be in service, and that gets paid annually out of the department's budget. Going back up to the top, salaries and wages obviously leading the way in percentage, and also the largest increase that we see here, that being driven by the new positions and the COLA increase. Slight decrease to miscellaneous service because of some of the savings that we saw. No major changes going all the way down on this worth mentioning here. So taking all that together, as Mr. Pearson mentioned, we do have a balanced budget. We're actually adding $723,000 worth of fund balance here in this budget. That brings our total over policy amount to roughly $125,000 over budget. You'll remember at mid-year we did change that policy, so it's a flat 16.6 percent of total expenditures. We no longer do the pull-out capital expenditures. So we took that step early. That was supposed to be in this budget, but we did that at mid-year with some excess funds. We will look over the course of the next few years to start building that up. I believe the target council wanted to see was 25% over the next several years. So we took that step at mid-year, maintained that here, and built that fund balance up a little bit for us. So moving along to property taxes. Here's kind of a summary of the last 2 years of property tax rates versus where we're at this year. The overall increase of roughly 3.2 cents per $100 of valuation. Most of that coming on the O&M side. That's the 2.7 cents. That is at the rollback rate. Mr. Pearson hit on that in his intro, and a slight increase to the debt side. You do see that the proportion of O&M to debt service, we gained a little bit on the O&M side here for this fiscal year. Worth mentioning that in our projections last year, we were just a fraction of a cent higher than where we're at this year, so we're relatively in line with what last year's multi-year said we would be at this year. Property tax revenues. So as Mr. Pearson noted in his intro, we included a annotated version of the worksheet we get from the state that calculates our property taxes. To say the least, it's convoluted and kind of hard to understand. On page number 2 in the property taxes section, we did our best to break out our thinking behind this to avoid adjustments like we had at mid-year this year. And if you'll see, what we get from the state essentially is a levy on everything except for those that have a cap applied to them, which is roughly $1 billion in value, sorry. We're going to get taxes back on those, and essentially what we're saying is from that we're going to get $2.3 million in the general fund and $3.3 million in the debt service fund. If you compare that to last year, that's actually less. That's just us being conservative this year. Taken together, we do project to have $61.3 million worth of property tax revenue exclusive of TIRZ administration fee in this budget. If you go back to this percentage here, 41.58, that split matches what we have here. So the general fund allocation is the same percentage as the rate, so we won't run into what we ran into mid-year this year where we had to adjust both sides of that to get back in line. We're confident that we've done our best to fix what was wrong last year and get back in line with where we need to be property tax-wise. Looking at a property tax bill comparison, this is a sample tax bill. Basically, we pulled the median household value and the 4.5% increase on assessed value, and this is what it looks like. A huge caveat I would add here is that none of these entities have adopted their tax rates yet. We did reach out to the school district, and they are coming down roughly 5% on their proposed tax rate. That's because of some of the changes with the legislature. So although they remain the largest portion of the tax bill, you see that does come down from last year. But in this example here, we have about $172 difference here. That is a home that's starting value is $265,000, 4.5% increase year over year here. Looking at the debt service fund for this year, just kind of a high level, review here. We are drawing down the fund balance. We're expecting to draw it down about $500,000. That does keep us over policy by about $300,000. As we've done in the past, we are quote unquote committing funds to keep the rate down. This year we're committing $4.3 million. We do expect to see 3.3 of that come back from that $1 billion worth of frozen value that we're not allowed to calculate in our levy. We saw just over that last year when we committed the $5 million. Roughly 70% of that is what we're anticipating getting back, again, in line with what we've seen in previous years, and we think a pretty conservative estimate. We don't anticipate using that, but you can see if that commitment was used, we'd still have a balance in there of roughly $6,000. But the over policy amount shown on the line above that is probably the better thing to look at here. The all-important tax-supported debt to assessed valuation. At the end of the day, the assessed valuation is really what pays our bills on the debt service side. You can see that consistently coming down year over year. That means that we are adding more value as we're adding more debt. That ratio going down is a good thing. That means that we have more and more capacity to take on the CIP program that we've obviously been undertaking for the last few years, and it's even more aggressive in the years to come. A secondary, not as important indicator, looking at the debt per capita. So this is residents. Obviously, the revenue doesn't come in based on residents, but it's still something to keep in mind. As our population grows, so does our city and the need for us to issue that debt. And we see that, again, consistently coming down over the last decade or so. Important to keep in mind. So the outstanding debt obligations as a whole, if we take a step back, we have roughly $304 million outstanding this fiscal year. Our total amount that we will pay is $31.4 million for debt this year out of the debt service fund. That's what we calculate the rate on. I will add that new this year, we do have a transfer coming in from Water and Sewer Fund, roughly $1.5 million to pay for some of the MUD rebates, roughly $7 million of MUD rebates that we're required to pay. Some of that debt is related to water and sewer projects. It's historically all been paid by the general fund. To make that a little more equitable, we do have an additional transfer in to cover some of that principal and interest payment for those rebates. Looking at the debt service tax rate projection, Mr. Pearson included this on his introductory slide. We are underneath our 45-cent projection from last year. Looking at the out years, this should look familiar. The 48.75 was what we included in our materials for the bond referendum. This does include a 5.5% taxable value growth in 21 and 5% in 22. That's always subject to change. We do our best to update that every year, but this could change as that valuation changes going forward. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Pearson for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Thank you again. And although we said formal changes by vote, we just carried that over from last year. The way the meeting is set up, we would actually be asking for any questions that we can bring in, and then if there's any consensus that does develop at this early point, we'd be happy to take that and start to work with that. But ask the council now to weigh in on any thoughts or perceptions that you may have.
Does council have any question or comment for the 2000 and the next budget process number 2?
I've got a couple. I've seen an increase over the last 5 years in the number of positions we have in the city. The ratio to per 1,000 people in population. Looks like we're adding 34 new positions this year, 13 of them for public safety. But it looks like the wish list started out at 85 and we pared it down to 34. So we expect to see that trend continue, the ratio of positions to 1,000 people in population.
Sure. So you're exactly right. I mean, we've building the fire department is one good example of where we've seen a lot of the staffing increases. Just like the growth rate itself, that'll slow down as we get Station 8 filled in. Next Station 4, which we'd like in the CIP, would be replacement. The next new station would be down the road for number 7 at Bailey Road. And so wouldn't anticipate that for several years. I would note on page 10 of the transmittal, we do show a long run, 10 years of staffing and cost per capita. That actually shows when we adjust it per capita, basically holding steady, a little bit of a decline. But and that's even with adding all of this, building a full-time fire department for a city of our size. So long way of saying the pace will decline after we get through this next 2 years.
I'm going to hold you to that.
The pace, I said.
Also, I'm okay with the slight tax increase we have this year, but over the next 4 years, we're seeing a significant increase, not only in the tax rate, but also, and that's driven by additional debt. We're also seeing a significant increase in the price of water and sewer, also primarily driven by debt. I think that's going to put a real burden on the families that are already living paycheck to paycheck, and I'm afraid we're going to price ourselves out of certain classes of people being able to live in this city if we continue that trend. It's a concern.
Well, you know, one of the things we're faced with in Pearland, as opposed to some cities, there's some cities like, I guess, Friendswood and some of the others that they're pretty stable. They haven't changed population much at all. And their growth, they haven't started doing a little growth now. They're on 518 in main part of town. So they're going to probably see some increases in both the population of personnel that they have, as well as the tax rate just a little bit to accommodate that. But once we get to the point where we're built out, I think you're going to see the population of the employees would be dropping, and also the tax rate will kind of stabilize. And we're a long way from building out yet, so and every year we're adding population, we're adding requirements to support them, so it's just, you've got to have these people and this money to make it happen. Woody?
Yeah, Mayor, I just want to add on a little bit to what council members said. You know, some of the concerns that I have, you know, I think this is pared back quite a bit from what the white papers that we saw recently on here. But we have some in reoccurring cost, and new positions on there are 9 to 10 months, and some are actually 1 to 3 months for this year. So those costs will be in addition to us when we go into 21. So, I mean, we're building debt here, but we're also building debt for 21 in reoccurring costs that we have on here. But they, you know, with what we're looking at here, and I think, you know, that we'll get into the other part pretty soon on the enterprise fund. But the cost, we're continuing to add cost as far as bond indebtedness that we have on here, and it says, you know, from looking at what was transpired on here and what was discussed, that we'll eventually get, you know, beyond that point, or we can incur more cost. I just find that hard to believe when we look at, and we'll be discussing the CIP coming up Monday night again. But when we look at it, at what we're incurring cost now on the debt service, and we look at adding over the next 4 to 5 years another $560 million, and given that a part of that is in the enterprise fund for the water and sewer rates, but you know, we're getting to the point where we're pretty limited on where we're at. We can't go in and annex more areas, you know, into that. I don't know if, you know, if we, I guess there was an article in the paper a couple of weeks ago that said that, you know, that maybe we need to look at coming back and looking at our space and filling in now with townhomes and apartments. That's not going to be handled very well, I don't think, with the residents in Pearland. And I see what, you know, what has been done, and it looks good, but there's, I don't, you know, I'm just really more concerned about the debt that we're bringing on, and the limited amount of space that we have to incur more debt to, and looking at more people to come here to pay more into as what we are. And that's a real big concern that I have. And then especially with the CIP, that we can't even handle maintenance now. We're so far behind on property and our facilities and things of that nature that we have, but we're adding more into the other. So I would like, you know, and I'm sure there's a good answer in this somewhere on the debt side of it, but you know, we looked at it of coming in and adding more debt for the CIP and the bond issue of $80 million and put that out to the citizens on there. But, you know, when you come in, you're looking at adding twice that amount over the next couple of years in there, and we had to bring it up now, the debt service up, you know, and up to 43.4 cents. So exponentially, you just see the tax rate continuing to grow over the next 4 to 5 years. And like the council members said, Little said that on there, that, you know, the other side of the equation is when we get into debt service to talk about that. But my biggest concern right now is incurring more debt, and some of the stuff that we see on here, we won't incur the full load until 2021. And so we're going to have to bring in more in to pay for that in the future. So that's my biggest concern right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think, yeah, we'll just go that direction.
Like this way, sorry about
Yes, sir. Obviously, my biggest concern is the street and sidewalks. We're still not being able managing that as effective as we like. I understand that is why we're in that position. I wish there was we had more capability to go after street and sidewalk maintenance to get closer to that $5 million apportionment that we need. Yeah, I'm concerned that our PCI rating keeps going down at least about a point each year. So if we don't start finding some way to kind of catch up with that and aggressively go after the maintenance, by the time the west side, which is most of our newer streets, by the time those roads start getting to the end of their service life, that PCI rating is going to go down significantly. I appreciate staff's comment about our PCI rating is relatively high. It's relatively high because most of our infrastructure is new. If you split the city, Cullen on either side, the PCI rating on the east side is significantly low, and I think it's relatively low compared to equally sized cities. Right now, we're having to bond to be able to just do routine maintenance in some of these subdivisions. So we need to have a better plan for that. I know I've talked with staff about some ideas. Right now, that's not it's not appropriate time to go into those ideas in detail, but it is a significant concern from my end. I was the one that suggested the 3% COLA for staff. I'll continue to reiterate that staff is, for any industry, any business, any organization, staff is the most important component, also the most expensive component. If you're going to have any kind of efficiencies, the efficiencies come from having staff that knows the systems, knows the organization well, does not require as much time to get up to speed on what has been done in the past, what the plans are for the future. So I'll accept the 2%. I don't think that there's I think I'd have to pull from other things that I think we need, particularly street and sidewalks, in order to make up the difference on the 3%. But I do think that we still have some staff salaries that need to be caught up, and I want us to try and be aggressive personally about making sure that our quality staff stays and feels appreciated and wants to stay. Clay, when you and I met, I understand the approach with the bonus in Christmas. I'd much rather just wrap that into normal salaries. If there's no other council that objects to just having the Christmas bonus on top of the longevity bonus, I won't push it. But I'd much rather have everybody have a base salary as opposed to give them a Christmas bonus this year and then in following years there's not necessarily one coming. But again, I appreciate it. I appreciate the approach. Police and fire, these are priorities we set several years ago. So I don't want to derail those. We need the police and fire, the 2 new police officers to keep on track of the priorities we set then. The firefighters are necessary in order to be able to spend a bunch of money on Fire Station 8 and not have any staff for it. So that we need to push on the continuous onboarding. I would just, I share my council members' concerns with respect to the debt rate, with respect to the tax rate. Again, just highlighting to everybody, us as council member, we're not exempt from the effects of the tax rate increase. So I don't like taking money out of my family's pocket any more than anybody else does. I would much rather be at a lower rate. I don't see how we get there without negating some of the priorities we've promised to the citizens. I mean, we could certainly attack the debt more aggressively, but we would have to pause capital projects. We would have to pause continuous onboarding. We'd have to pause adding the police officers. We probably would have to consider a hiring freeze in order to be able to do anything that's aggressive. to be able to lower that rate. And I just don't see that that's really a direction we want to head. I mean, we can't continue to spend money and say that we want to continue to add to these projects and provide these maintenance services and provide these other auxiliary services that the citizens have told us that they want, but take in less revenue or not increase the revenue, and not be able to take on some debt. There's just not a mathematical way of doing that. So if we want to have that discussion, I think that's a good one for us to have, and talk about, maybe we want to be less aggressive on the capital projects in order to be able to attack more debt. But there's no way for us to get the rate lower without pausing a lot of the projects that we've already promised, or just stop promising projects. Other than that, I think staff's done a great job. I understand and appreciate how difficult it is putting all this information together. Certainly, and I've brought up a few points to Clay. There's always imperfections, but I think it's a lot of work. It represents a lot of work. It represents a lot of value to the city. So I appreciate all that y'all have done. That's all I have, Mayor.
I tend to agree. I don't see anywhere in here where we can make any major cuts, especially with adding the Station 8 and staffing Station 8. I agree also that I don't like to see the tax rate go up, but I'm shocked that it hasn't gone up more with the bond issue and all of the stuff that's being done right now. So, I don't know, more to come in session 2, I guess. My one question is on the sales tax. We've seen a decrease in the sales tax. What are we claiming as far as sales tax on part of the budget? Are we shooting at 4%?
You're talking about the increase relative to our amended budget?
So every year we count on sales tax as part of our funding to operate the city. Were we still counting 4% on that?
So the increase from last year will be 1%.
Okay, so 5?
So 1% over last year's increase. I don't know.
Yeah, we increased in what we've received, but every year when we are doing budget, we always talk about how much sales tax is dependent upon the general fund.
So a portion of the total revenue in the general fund from sales tax it's 25%, isn't
I
it?
believe that's close. Well,
Okay, I thought we were expecting like 4% that we were going to get, and we had to lower it because we didn't get that much.
So I think maybe going into last year, we might have had that 3 or 4% range, but that's why we had to adjust at mid-year. So we recognize that. But
Right. So what are we doing for?
So that's the 1% he's talking about.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
I just,
I had a question on one of the items in the budget, the bridge at Independence Park. I went to go check that out. I saw that it's the bridge, if this can be confirmed, I guess, between the parking lot next to where the pool was to the dog park. Is that correct? Where the bridge was? Okay. So I went down there to check that out. I feel as though if it's a possibility to try to find that $250,000 somewhere else, maybe with some of our foundations that we work with. I just, I think back when I take my dog to the dog park, I take my dog to the dog park exclusively. So I go specifically for that purpose, and I feel like, the parking area right now is kind of, cruddy, but I feel like we could potentially get it done. It's not a huge mountain to overcome, I suppose. And then at least if we can free up some of that money, we can move it over. Specifically, I'd like to see it move to sidewalks, so we can add that $250 to sidewalks. If that's a possibility, I'd like to at least have the conversation with some of our foundation partners to see if we can potentially do something like that. And I had a question. You had mentioned the ISDs potentially lowering their rate. How sure is this?
I might look to Mr. Pearson to answer that question.
Yeah, I can follow up with you. I mean, like was referenced, I made the inquiry to both the superintendents and got the same answer, that they were looking to to lower in that kind of range that you heard about, but let me get a better sense of the timing and certainty of that. But it sounds like it's, just reading between the lines in their notes, it was pretty solid. Maybe it'll change slightly, but that was what they indicated, so.
Okay. And then, if it's possible, actually see the note on Councilmember Moore's. He
It
didn't.
was just
I
warm.
was actually thinking the same thing, so maybe he'll chime in on this as well. I don't know if this is a possibility, but if we were, just for the sake of discussion, I don't know if staff can come up with something. If we were to say stay at the effective rate, if staff can give us a end of days scenario where we could find the 2.7 million, just out of curiosity. I haven't found it, so I'm just curious to see what staff would come up with if that were the case.
To go through that exercise, we'll take some time and we can do something, but, do you want us to bake in that we would not do the 13 firefighters for Station 8? Because that would mean we'd have to find it, you know what I'm saying? It'd just be.
Well, right, that's what I'm saying. I just wanted to see.
I don't want to bring you
what
back
other-
something which, it's going to be crazy no matter what. It means no streets and sidewalks. It means, and if you wanted us to open Station 8 without, I'm not saying you're saying this, but.
No, I get all of that. I'm just curious. I just, like I said, I'm one person going through this.
I think you've kind of had, if I could throw the same reactions, that's what I've been hearing. It's just, I'd hate to put something down on paper and go through the exercise to say the obvious, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
It'd be crazy.
Okay. Well, yeah. So and I'll kind of echo as well. I believe it was Councilmember Perez. We have to feel the effects of an increase as well. I actually think that if the ISDs are going to lower theirs, that at least that will provide, some respite for us, having an increase on the total tax bill. So I'm not too concerned, but that's where I'm really trying to focus. If that's a sure deal, then this seems a lot easier to swallow. I'm not totally uncomfortable with everything here. I'm just for the sake of curiosity. But I appreciate it.
Mayor, if I can make one statement on here real quick. The increase that we're looking at on that is on the bond program that we sold bonds on to get the tax rate up. The thing that bothers me on some of this is, it's the point that, I did budgets for 13 years for the city of Houston, here for 15 years, and everybody wants to attack what I call the heartstrings, which is police, fire, EMS. Our whole purpose here is for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens here.
Houston.
And I don't think that anybody sitting up here at this council would want to stop any of those. I think, of those three areas, and I understand where city manager's talking about on fire station number 8. We can't do that. We can't do that at all. But from right now that we see on the increase, we had talked about doing the bond program, $80 million in bonds, and the tax rate would go up, or actually 48 cents out of the 70 something. But so that I don't think has anything to do with the rates. I've never been a one that was, I've always spoke out against the way that we budget stuff, from the standpoint that, of the criteria we use. If you bring in 100 more citizens into Pearland, you got to increase the number of staff on the fire, police, and EMS. If that was the case, City of Houston would have 60, 70,000 employees that do nothing but those areas there. I think, as it is, you get, and then when you go into public works, I say, we filled 900 potholes, and that's why we needed, the extra people. But, every year that we've done this, people say that, this is the city manager's budget play. So I've always wanted to make sure that the department head stood up at the podium and said, yes, this is the money I need to run, and this is what happened if I don't. If you got to have people to buy into these subjects here in the amount of money. But going back to what the original was, the increase that I see of going through here, was actually, for the bond issue that we all agreed to. So, more to come.
I have one other question. We're talking about adding a person to the Parks Department for a Parks Coordinator. Y'all said that they would facilitate not only the Independence Park, but other facilities. What other facilities?
Chris can take that.
Good morning, Councilmember. The additional facilities and events would be our special events team. As it is right now, we are working towards some established goals for cost recovery within that mechanism. And what this additional position would allow us to do is to expand those programs within events to allow for additional opportunities for sponsorship and additional alternative revenue streams.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
A little?
Just a couple of quick ones, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to commend staff on the great job putting this budget together. You guys continue to receive awards each year for putting it together, and I'm sure they don't just give those things out. Behind the tab multi-year forecast on page 4, the paragraph right above conclusion, starting with sales tax. This is for PEDC. It says that the revenues from sales tax increased by 6% between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 2022, but yet it shows a decrease from 13.3 to 12 million. Is that a typo? And why would our sales tax be going down? And it states it as if it's already happened. It says sales tax increased by 6%, and there's maybe it should say are projected to increase, but then the math actually shows a $1.3 million decrease.
So if I'm with you, you're talking about the transmittal page 1 and 2 there, right?
It's page 4 behind multi-year forecast, right above the conclusion paragraph, starting with sales tax.
Gotcha. Stand by.
I can jump in. That is a typo. It's a 3% increase per year. If you look at the actual numbers, that's a typo in our write-up.
Sorry.
So the numbers switched.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So it should be from 12 million to 13.3 million.
Yeah, if you look at the page 9 here for the multi-year budget, this is what went to PEDC and was adopted in July, I believe it was. It goes from the 11.3 to the 12 million here. I think that was just a fat finger typo on our part.
So it's a typo.
That was a typo, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I don't mean to sound picky, but.
Hey, no worries, no worries.
And the only other thing is, I kind of reiterate what Councilman Perez said. I'd like to see more money spent on sidewalks. That's one of the complaints I hear most often. Why can't the city of Pearland fix the damn sidewalks? Excuse my French. Is it possible we could, when we receive that FEMA money, could we allocate more of it to sidewalks and less of it to some of the other categories? Is there a way y'all could work the numbers and maybe come back with something?
If I could, yeah, we're looking forward to, we get those calls, 10 times if I could, and so it's frustrating. We want to be able to do more of that, and that would be our approach. Is on the that FEMA money is to emphasize sidewalks for a couple reasons. One, we've got this backlog; it's something people see and use, and it's easier to program, frankly, because the street work, it takes more time to program and plan it out. So if we can make eat into that backlog with that FEMA money, that would be, I think, a win-win all the way around.
All right. Thank you. Again, great job, staff.
Thank you,
Paul, Mayor.
Is that all? I was going to skip Derek because he didn't know what the original question was we're working on. We'll catch him when we'll flip-flop on the next item 3. Councilmember Longo?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Reading this budget, I feel fundamentally really optimistic about the city of Pearland, and just to reiterate, think that staff did a great job. Like the other members, I also worry about the likelihood of rising rates in the future forecast and the debt. On the debt side, though, I think that it's kind of a testament to past councils that the metrics that matter when we think about debt and we're talking about the federal government. When we start getting really concerned is when the debt as a share of the economy starts going up, or when the debt on a per person basis starts going up. On both of those counts, the city of Pearland is doing a great job in terms of we have a smaller debt burden per person than we did in years past, and we have the debt is a smaller share of our economy than in years past. So I'm think that's definitely something to be mindful of and watching, but I think that prudent stewardship in years past has served us well there. I'm more concerned about the rising tax rates, and I think that's kind of a function of we need to increase our taxable value. Looking at the white paper documents from February and just seeing the comparison between some of our peer cities, I think that fundamentally, if we want to be able to service our priorities, and not put so much of a burden onto homeowners as we're discussing, that's going to be a function of our continued economic development efforts. And then the last thing I had, just kind of a question. When we see that chart that shows the condition of the streets and sidewalks, I think that's very useful, but it's a little abstract. Councilmember Perez said, if you were to divide a line, you would have not as great pavement quality east of Cullen. And so I think it would be helpful for us to kind of know when we have those tranches of very good streets all the way down to very poor streets, would it be possible to get examples of, here's an example of a 75 pavement condition, here's an example of a 50 pavement condition in Pearland? That would be kind of instructive. This is, if we had 50 everywhere, it would be like this road over here that we all hate.
Would it be helpful, we can do that and maybe show like some actual neighborhoods or streets that we're looking at that we'd program next, and what we would, if we get, for instance, any of that FEMA money that wasn't for sidewalks or fleet, what that would do, where we could get into next. And then that we'd show the PCI for those, and that'd help with those examples. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think that, if we could go to just drive to a neighborhood and see, this is, wow, if we let this slip to 60, the whole city would be kind of like this. I think that would be helpful in terms of prioritizing that spend.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I just got one more thing. On the forecast, page 5, we're showing an increase in property tax revenue from 2020 to 2022, almost a 30% increase. What's driving that? We're going from 36.3 million to 47 million in 2 years. Where is that additional tax base coming from?
I think that's mostly your house.
My house?
Yes.
So you're talking debt service on
coming in.
page 5?
Page 5 of the multi-year forecast.
People get here.
Debt service. Revenues from property taxes jumping from 36 million to 47 million in 2 years.
So that's going to be two things. One is the rates in our projections that you saw; those go together. So the 47 would be basically our best estimate on the amount that we needed to service the anticipated debt. So it's all inclusive, but that would be supported by that rate you saw. So it's the tax base growing, those percentages, the 4% that John mentioned, and then the 40, the 38 cents, whatever that was. That'll get you $47 million.
And essentially what we're doing is those bond payments are kind of what we know if we issue the debt according to the CIP. And then the property tax revenue is just kind of the amount of property tax revenue we'll need to cover that. And then if you look at the over policy on the bottom here, that's the amount that would just keep us over that policy minimum, if that makes sense.
That's the amount that's going to be allocated to pay off the debt, not the amount that's going to be generated from the tax.
It's our best guess at what we will need from tax using the rate of 48.75.
We're allocating more of our property taxes, approximately 30% more of it to service debt in 2022 than we are in 2020.
It would be an $11 million difference roughly.
Okay, thank you.
I think our tax rate is raised pretty well following the growth rate of our city, and by state law, we're required to provide service for the citizens. And we've got unfortunate in a lot of ways because we're a city that everybody wants to come live, work, and play. So as our population increases, we have to provide the service. Sometimes it makes another fire station, it makes some more police officers, it makes some more sidewalks, it makes another park. And I think when you look at the tax rate over the last 10 years, it hasn't increased very much considered what it has been in other cities across the state. So I think that we're keeping our tax rate pretty commensurate with the growth rate and the amount of service we need to increase to provide the service for them. So I don't feel uncomfortable there. Where I'd feel uncomfortable would be the fact that we're not putting in place all of the development that we need for the people that we already have in the city. And we're trailing a lot of service requirements for the population growth we have. So it's something we need to keep remembering that if we stop growing, I think we're going to catch up with our tax rate and a lot of production of roads and streets and parks. Huh?
If I could, maybe one of the follow-ups I think that would help us all is putting to numbers one of the slides I did in the intro. The voters approved the 2019 bond, and we're being very diligent about getting those projects done as quickly as possible, and B, doing them as efficiently as possible. But there's another component that I mentioned, and that's the TIRZ interim financing. We've got $50 million worth of public improvements and that are baked into that projection and that are driving some of that debt service rate that we're getting free money at the end of the day. But in the meantime, and that's inclusive of interest, we've got to finance that. So the library, for example, is in this CIP, and that's CO debt financed that we are financing, but we're going to get that money back in, whatever I said, 6 years, 7 years. So the voter-approved bond issue, the TIRZ financing, and the other financing, plus the COs that we have issued, those all go together. But I'll try to quantify that for you, and that'll give you a little peace of mind, I think.
A couple other minor things that aren't integral to the overall budget, but just questions. I'd like to see if I can get an answer, maybe not today, but maybe before the next budget meeting. On our hot tax, right now we're projecting a fund balance of roughly 1.5, but I've not seen any kind of projections or plan for what we hope to do with that fund balance. Presently, we're getting more in hot tax than we're spending. So I think maybe not necessarily for this budget, but maybe there's a future conversation about programming. Are we saving for a large expenditure, or do we want to try and be more aggressive about what we're doing with the hot tax? The traffic improvement fund, we're looking at a projected imbalance of about $120,000.
If couldn't press, maybe this is all general fund that we got over, so that'd be the section 2. If we could put that on hold and come back to that, if that's all right.
All right, we'll do.
We'll be ready, hopefully.
Fair enough.
Ready for number 3, Clay?
I don't know if that's a sign that we need to move to the next section, or if you're all ready for that. We can present, I'm sorry.
One other thing, and this is probably pretty quick. On that page 6, on multi-year budget, can you give indicate, well, that's, it does a tax rate, general fund, the debt service total rate, and we do a forecast for 21 and 22. And the proposed is what we got, 0.7412. And then the forecast in 21 be a 0.7885. And then we see a small reduction in forecast for 22 of 0.7842. Are we paying off debt during that time? And because I know we're increasing debt and indebtedness during that time, but it's
a good question. So that, if you look at the split on that tax rate, the decrease is all coming from the general fund portion, and that is because the growth on taxable value is exceeding that 3.5% cap from the legislature. So what we did was put a 3.5% cap on total property taxes. We don't know the inner workings of how they're going to administer that 3.5% yet, so that's likely going to change. So this is our best guess at how they're going to pass down to us how to calculate that. But that reduction is coming from general fund, and it's because of that 3.5%.
Okay, so this is the best guess on here, but I guess earlier on in there, we say that in this budget, we're not including future indebtedness. There's a asterisk down there that says this budget does not include.
Yes, so you're right. The forecasted for the debt service fund includes debt that has not been issued yet, and we don't have that in this year's budget. So what City Council will adopt this year, when we do our 2 readings in September, the Exhibit A, the expenditures, will be debt that's already been issued. So the budget, yes, doesn't include debt that hasn't been issued, but we do forecast out using the CIP what those payments will be if we issued the debt for future. That makes sense.
And the reason it won't be in next year's budget is we will actually issue the debt late next fiscal year, so the payments wouldn't pop into FY20. So we won't have those until, but the multi-year does include that, right?
Yes, yes.
Clay, I'm ready for number 3 here, and I'll ask you to lead this on that
All right,
one.
I'll ask John and his folks to kick that off on this Neely or.
Good morning, Mayor and Council, and Mr. Pearson. I will be presenting the Enterprise Fund budget this morning. Funding highlights for the Enterprise Fund include several new positions and a new construction crew, a maintenance supervisor, and right-of-way inspector, just to name a few. In addition, the budget includes a Peterbilt truck and trailer to keep wide, slow-moving city equipment off roadways. The Enterprise Fund includes an additional 8 FTEs, including 1.5 for grounds maintenance, 1 FTE for distribution and collection, 2 for construction, 1 in backflow, and 1 in utility billing, and 1.5 in information technology. Revenues total $60.5 million, and includes a 5% rate increase for the FY20 budget. Water and sewer fund expenditures total $56.6 million and includes a 2% COLA and $19.2 million in annual debt service. Other requirements, which includes debt service, makes up the majority of the expenses at 28.2, followed by water production at 10.7 million and water reclamation at 5.3. Proposed revenues over expenditures are 3.99 million, leaving a proposed ending cash equivalence at 25.9, and bond coverage and cash reserve minimums are met. The principal balance after the 2020 payments of 18.9 million are made will be 224.76 million, excluding new debt issued in 2020. After a year with no increase, a 5% rate increase is needed for fiscal year 20. The 2021 forecasts a revenue increase of 9%. The city anticipates selling 127.8 million in revenue bonds, of which 107.6 million is for the surface water plant phase 1. A revenue increase of 9% is anticipated for fiscal year 2022, leaving an ending cash equivalence of 12.5 million. Bond coverage and cash reserves are met at 1.88 and 34% respectively. The city revised its rate structure to a base charge scale up by meter size. The rate increases, when required, follow the rate structure put in place in 2016. Due to the significant capital needs in the last few years, revenue increases have been required to ensure financial health and stability of the water and wastewater system, which follows several years of no increases. A 2,000-gallon residential customer bill will increase $1.53 to $39.57, while a 10,000-gallon residential customer with a sewer cap of 8,000 has a bill of $108.57, an increase of $5.05. On the commercial side, a small office building customer with a 2-inch meter using 53,000 gallons would see an increase of $33.20 from their current invoice of $710.18, while a large customer's invoice with a 6-inch meter and consumption of 169,000 gallons will increase by $133.17. The proposed bill for a residential customer using 6,000 gallons of both water and sewer is $76.89. The same customer in Lake City has a $61.27 bill, and in Friendswood, $66.33. 92% of the 38,000 customers are residential, 1% multi-unit, 4% commercial, and 3% irrigation. Of those 38,000 customers, 92% have a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter, and the other 8% have a 1 inch or higher. Residential customers consume 67.1% of the water sold, commercial 23.3%, and irrigation is 9.7%. With that, I'll turn it over to Rachel Winslow.
Good morning, Council, Mayor, and Mr. Pearson. The city has 3 internal service funds. The Property and Liability Fund covers the city's property and casualty insurance. Premiums are expected to increase in fiscal year 20 by $70,848, and the proposed ending balance is $73,718. The Medical Self-Insurance Fund, in fiscal year 20, this fund is projected to use $163,000 of fund balance. The fund balance is estimated to end with 38% of total expenditures. This exceeds the target fund balance by $2.1 million. The Motor Pool Fund is now in its second year of operation, and beginning in fiscal year 20, lease fees will be paid for vehicles replaced in fiscal year 19. Estimated fund balance at the end of fiscal year 20 is $602,000. Our special revenue funds. Funding highlights for special revenue funds include the replacement of an Independence Park Bridge from Park Development Fund, PEG Capital Fund expenditures, and Tree Trust Capital Fund expenditures. Our Safe Community special revenue funds continue to operate as they have in the past years. Court building, court technology, and all operate off assessed fees. All funds are predicted to end with positive fund balances. The Sustainable Infrastructure special revenue funds include the Solid Waste Fund, which includes a slight increase effective October 2019 due to CPI. There are no budgeted expenses in sidewalk and traffic improvement in fiscal year 20. All funds are anticipated to end with a positive fund balance. Parks, Recreation, and Events. Hotel Motel includes annual operating costs. As mentioned earlier, planned expenses from these funds include the replacement of a pedestrian bridge at Independence Park. Our grant funds include funding for 2 crime victim liaisons through a VOCA grant, as well as the continuation of the Emergency Management Performance Grant. CDBG expenditures include several programs, including emergency rental and utility assistance, mental health counseling, and collaborative student service initiatives through different agencies. Now I'll turn it back over to John McCarter.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll bring us home here this morning. Starting with our Pearland Economic Development Corporation Fund. This, as presented, was approved by the PEDC Board on July 12th. But you can see here, we do have a drawdown of fund balance of roughly $7.2 million. Major items within this year's budget, $11.3 million for the 288 corridor master plan improvement. Business incentives amounting to $2.4 million. State Highway 38 redevelopment strategy, roughly $1.5 million. And $2.4 million of improvements along Lower Kirby. Lastly, this morning, we go over our fee updates. You can find all of these in the appendix of the budget document in book number 1, along with a summary memo and a detailed updated ordinance. These are reviewed annually through the budget process. We get requests from departments to do adjustments for a number of reasons. We will bring this back to you as an ordinance in September for 2 readings along with the budget document and the tax rate. So there are 2 kind of buckets of updates this year. The first coming from Parks and Recreation. Independence Park, obviously a new facility for us this year. This would add the rental fees in there. Some adjustments being made to the southbound rental fee to bring those up to market. The special event permit fee, increasing that to $100 to better recoup staff time spent on those types of events. And a family day pass for the recreation and natatorium brought to $18 and updating the definition of a family to better clarify who qualifies for that pass. On the public works side, there are quite a few updates. All of them are really based around adjustments that came in 2018 with the comp and class study. All of our rates went up. We didn't adjust the fees accordingly, so this is to kind of catch up. So we're recouping the labor and material costs there. Obviously, Neely hit on the water and sewer rates, but those will be included in those fee updates as well. With that, I will hand it back to Mr. Pearson to close us out today.
So again, ask for your questions and feedback, and maybe Member Perez preempted and like to go back to that, the hot question. I don't know, if, John, you want to try to take that on?
So we would love direction on how you would like to spend that money moving forward in the future. That's an opportunity that we could use for a wide variety of different things that would help to attract tourists to Pearland. I think that's one of the things that we're lacking is event-type facilities, things that would help to bring people, put heads in beds. That money could be utilized at some point in the future. Ultimately, if we're talking about a convention center of some type, so or anything that you deem as appropriate. So we'd love direction on that. We did carry over $500,000 for the renovation of the depot. That money is available, and I'll just remind you that that particular first phase of that, which is basically a renovation and providing ADA restrooms, will be carried over in the budget. We'll do that in the budget adjustment with the carryovers, I believe. Is that correct, John?
Yes, sir.
And then that money could be allocated if you wanted to do that. But your general question, we're open to direction.
I don't want to dive too deep into it because I think that's a longer discussion, but just maybe to put parentheses around the conversation, we could use it for a facility as long as it's heads and beds. Are we capable of borrowing against it? If we accelerate a project, can it essentially do like a revenue bond off of it where we could spend, let's say, $3 million on it and then pay debt off with what the future revenue? If you don't know the answer, it could be a future update.
Yeah, it is my understanding that you can use that money for issuance of debt as long as it goes directly for what you stated, putting heads in beds.
Okay. I think it's probably too much detail for this, but I'd like to have some kind of plan for what we're doing with the additional revenue since it's just kind of sitting in an account. And also, since we're talking about the other special fund, the traffic fund, we got about $620,000, and Robert left. So, if maybe by budget discussion too, if we could have some idea of what we're programming that revenue to go towards.
So that special revenue fund is actually collected on a per project basis. So it's already dedicated for certain tracks of road. We can't use it for anything other than what it was contributed for.
So yeah, those are the pro rata shares that we collect from other individuals that say, hey, look, we can't charge you for the full signal. We're going to give you, you're going to pay $100,000 for your pro rata share. Mm-hmm. I guess what I've never felt a handle on is how how are we programming the utilization of that money?
Yeah, we got a schedule that we can share too that shows how that's.
That would be helpful, because I've even when I was helping collect the fine, I never really saw how isolated it was. Does it have to go to a particular intersection? Can we use it for a region? Where we can kind of have some fungibility of that fund, so we can attack more of the signal improvements that I know we need. The other thing, I'd like us to try. Well, let me just say this on the impact fees. In the next year, are we capping the impact fees, water wastewater impact fees, to the highest value? Is there more revenue that can be generated from the water and wastewater impact fees?
We brought that update to you from Freeze and Nichols, and there's the state says you can do maximum of 50%, but we set those rates and we just refreshed that based upon our CIPs. So, I mean, you could raise that more, but we did increase it last time we saw that with Freeze and Nichols.
I think what we and I do remember that report, and I apologize. Could we look at what additional revenues could be generated if we increase the impact fees, the maximum allowable rate by law, and see what that possibly could do to the water rate per customer? And I know it's an unpredictable amount of money, but we do budget it, so maybe we can take a look at whether we can de-stress a little bit of the rate increase over the next few years to be able to fund the capital improvements and the extension of the water lines and sanitary sewer with higher impact fee rates.
We can bring that, if you're okay with it, it might be more appropriate since we just adopted those. I don't know if the timing would be, you think for this budget cycle or the next time we look at those, or?
I've got a question just to make sure we're clear. So we are at the maximum rate based on our last impact fee study. So to increase that, we'd have to go through a full new study.
Okay. So basically, we've capped the revenue we can get off of the impact fees.
Yes, sir. And we typically do that on about a 5-year cycle. And so we'd look at that again in about 3.5, 4 years. But we can always do it sooner if we see something that's going to impact that greatly. But since we've got this last update took into account the surface water plant and a couple of wastewater plant expansions, we can take a look at that, but we think all that's captured in the current.
And if I could, I think one of the other things in addition to the CIP and the plants was the ETJ, stripping that out. It doesn't change it a whole lot, but we didn't bank that on. And this budget is, the water sewer fund is helped by transfers from the impact fee fund. Is that the $1.5 million? Or
I believe it's a total of 6.
6 million, sorry. $1.5 million was the mud, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, so 6 million from the mud rebate. So that is helping rates, but that's appropriate in the way it should be because we're building out these plants.
Again, just trying to look at creative ways that we can try and increase or take less pressure off of the water rate. The meter fees, a couple of years ago when we talked about the meter fees, we were looking at a higher fee for the larger meters, and then we had some discussion, essentially trying to put more demand on that revenue generation on the commercial side as opposed to the residential side. We as a council decided to level that a little bit more than what was proposed by staff at that time because we'd gotten some feedback from the chamber and a couple of business members. But is it possible that we could revisit that in this next year's adoption of what we do with the base fee per meter rate to try and maybe increase the revenue we're generating on the commercial side and possibly take less pressure off of the water rate?
If I could, we'd be happy to do that, some tweak scenarios. I guess I just ask for some level of support that there's interest in doing that before we do. I mean, it's somewhat involved, so I hear what you're saying. Is there others that might be interested in that too?
My question right now is it possible? And then my question with them would be
It's possible with some work.
Okay. So I guess I would put it to the other council members. Is that something we want to explore? Is trying to imbalance the base rate for the meters, so there's more revenue coming in from the commercial side as opposed to the residential side. Try and take some pressure off of trying to generate more revenue off of the rate, off the bill.
Why don't we have an orderly discussion on this for the other council,
Yes, sir.
starting for Orlando? Thank you, and we'll pick back up where you left off.
I don't have anything to add on that.
Okay, Councilor Reed.
So a few things before, answering, well, not necessarily answering Councilmember Perez's question, but kind of addressing it. So you presented something that showed, I guess, a difference or a comparison between League City and other cities, and I don't see that in our book. Is that a page that
Something
we
we've
have?
shared in the presentation here, just to give you that comparison. So it's on the slide there, 61.
Yeah, I mean, it is scary, but I mean, this is pretty important when we're up here trying to, kind of decide and think about the things that Councilman Perez presented, amongst other things. But specifically, I would like to see this. I mean, we're pretty high, and it definitely makes a hell of a difference when trying to decide on this budget. Just looking at other cities. Also, if you look at page 5, Enterprise Water and Sewer Fund, under the Enterprise Fund tab, it says transfer and other charges, and there's a $3 million difference, almost $3 million difference from year-end amended 2019 to 2020 proposed. Is there a breakdown in here of what those transfer and other charges are?
So John, is that going to be the?
We might have to follow up with line item detail, but 1.5 million of that is a transfer to the debt service fund to cover the MUD rebates. So our debt service fund pays out roughly $7 million of rebates to the MUDs for the debt that they have. A lot of that debt is related to water and sewer type items, and we've never paid it out of water and sewer. So this year, we took the first step and said 1.5 million will be transferred over to cover the water and sewer portion, and we'll look to build that up to roughly 50-50 over time.
So what's the other? Can I have a breakdown of the other 1.5?
Yeah, I think we might have to follow up with that, but yes, we have that.
I think it helps when we get like when I see a huge difference like this, and $3 million. I mean, that's pretty big, specifically when we're talking about the amount, the cost to our residents, and so just kind of knowing what that breakdown is, so we can make a conscious decision about I guess, and this goes back to Councilman Perez's comment, making a conscious decision about how we allocate different funds. That's pretty high, and we don't seem to be going down anytime soon. $76.89, on average for residential for 6,000 gallons is, I mean, it's crazy in comparison when you start looking at the other cities that are nearby. We've, like Councilman Perez mentioned, and it's been mentioned just in general. I mean, we continue to spend more and more money, but we're not saving our residents, any of it. I'd like to see us take a different approach and try to see how we can go about lowering the residential side of this, and not necessarily fully increasing or hitting all the businesses hard. I mean, there's a lot of small businesses in our city, but I mean, we definitely need to find a way to lower the residential costs. I think maybe seeing a breakdown of this transfers and other charges would help. Right now, to answer your question or to comment on your question, I really, I can say, let's go and try to find a way, but I mean, transfers and other charges, and there's other things, miscellaneous services, that's gone down, which is good, or at least proposed it's gone down, but water is just something in general that we need to tackle and try to find a different solution for.
Little.
I too would like to see this chart comparing the local cities included in the budget. I think it causes a little outrage among the citizens when they see that we're almost $30, average residential bills almost $30 more per month than the city of Pasadena, and we're significantly higher than Sugar Land and League City. To reiterate what Councilman Reed said, on the transfers and other charges, you addressed 1.5 million of it. What does the other 27 million consist of? Is that money for debt?
Partially. So it's really three main components, and Neely might have to correct me if I get this wrong. But we have an administrative fee really that goes back to general fund. So we have things like HR, city manager's office, city secretary that are budgeted in the general fund but support the water and sewer system. So they get a charge for that. I believe it's 18%. And then we do have portions of the debt, non-MUD rebate portions of the debt that are covered by water and sewer. So we've pledged resources to transfer those to the debt service fund. So salaries and administrative costs, MUD rebates, and other debt obligations are really the big three.
There's also cash funding of some CIP projects that are small dollar amounts. In addition, the motor pool transfers are also in there.
Can we break those out? I mean, it's over half of your expenses, and it's just lumped in at other, or transfers in. And on the top half of that page, that's page 5 of the enterprise fund, you've got other requirements. Again, you've got over 50% of the total cost just lumped into other requirements. If we could break that out too. You have an asterisk by it, but there's no explanation for it that I see. If we could break those amounts out and give us a little better idea of what over half the expenses are. That's all I have, Mayor.
Yeah. Looking at the chart, the Finswood through Pasadena have been working on this for a number of years before we ever started. And so they've got most of their system pretty well in place. And our rates are based on constructing new lines and new water sources. And so I hope at some point that will start stabilizing too in Pearland. Those numbers will drop down in future years. Councilmember Fernandez?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the water bills, I guess to touch on Member Perez's question, I'm not necessarily against passing some of the cost on to business. I mean, for us, we can build that into our cost. I mean, it's such a negligible amount, I think, if we take on that increase on the business side. I guess it depends on the business, but I mean, we can build that into some of the costs that we have, which would not necessarily affect every resident. So I had a question here, though, on, let's see. Okay, so on the utility billing, we have a billing specialist. Can you just give me a little bit more info on what the billing specialist does? What?
I might look to Cynthia for that answer.
I can get it to come on. Okay, this particular billing specialist will be needed to, they actually calculate and print out the bills every month. They do all of the calculations, they take the meter reads and work with the system to get those done. Right now, we have a couple of those individuals, but we have one who specializes in delinquency, and that individual is not able to take off for vacations or a sick time or pretty much any time because there's no backup for them at this point. So we need just one additional person that will work across all of the billing, the normal regular cycle billings and the delinquency.
So is there, I'm assuming we have software that integrates and interfaces, I guess, with, or provides an interface for the meters that we have.
Yes, sir, we do have software. At this point, we take our time to check the calculations from the software, and that's mainly due to some issues we had last year. We have not had any reoccurring issues of the same type. However, we want to make sure that when we send the bills out that they are accurate. And we just need a little bit more staff to augment that process.
So currently there's only one billing specialist?
There's one delinquency billing specialist who specializes in the delinquencies, and that is the individual who inputs the information to do the automated calls and also works with just the delinquent side of the operation. There are 2 additional billing specialists who work with the actual billing and getting that information out, and they are all quite overloaded at this point. We have a lot of people that work nights and weekends when there's the actual billing in order to get it out in a timely manner.
Is there a possibility to maybe identify some better software, something that have better phone web capabilities to handle these types of processes that are currently being, I guess, pushed onto staff? Is there anything that's come across our plate
We've made a significant investment in this software, so we're trying to just make sure that we do everything on our part to make sure that we're getting what we need. And I think to defer that, I think I'd have to defer that a little bit to the manager.
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of the software not, it's just the system's big and, you know, two people, if that's what it is for the specialist to, you know, check and make sure that those run correctly, that's the most important thing. We're added, as I've shown a couple times, you know, the people we've added into the front line has helped tremendously, and the software we have installed already for tracking calls and so forth shows demonstrable positives. So it's a lot easier to get a hold of us now than the cable company.
Okay. So we're getting considerable number of calls and things like that.
I mean, it's a normal for as big as the system is. It is what it is. We're just trying to make sure it stays consistent, that the billing cycles are consistent, and you know, when it goes out, it's done correctly. So you know, so it's nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay.
Well, you know, we have our hiccups, but you know.
Well, sure. Yeah, I'm just thinking moving forward, you know, as you have more and more people that are more comfortable with, I think, using web interfaces, things like that for.
We still have a lot of people that like to come and pay their bills.
Oh, yeah, but, you know,
I hear
again,
you.
looking long term.
It's a win-win for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Moore?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to touch on what Councilman Hernandez said, I remember when we started putting in these new meters, and we were able to reduce the workforce by 4 employees, but then those 4 employees got assumed by the Parks Department, so we really didn't save anything. I would like to see, if we're spending money on technology, that technology would then pay for itself more so than having to buy technology and then increasing staff to keep up with that technology. It kind of doesn't make sense, but.
No, I mean, the only thing is the system expands and you've got more customers, and we were understaffed before no matter what software you had. So I think we're avoiding, you know, making it a lot easier, and it's going to get better and better with the AMI and what people can see online to support what we have. So it's not a one-for-one relationship, and it's, you know, it's working well, and it'll get better as we turn the corner here in the next year.
And just to also touch on, I'm not in favor of changing how we do the water billing. It's the fairest system out there based upon the water meter size. You start hitting businesses for an increased amount of the water usage, then you're going to have less businesses that are willing to come to the city. We looked at this before. We tried, you know, the burden was looked at on putting it upon the businesses, and I didn't think that was very, very fair. The way we do it now is as fair as it is. It is a usage. I do agree that, you know, the water billing is significantly higher than a lot of people would want to pay, and especially when you look at the rates around us, it's significantly higher. I've always been frustrated that every time something new moves into the city, I feel like I have to pay the brunt of it. Every time we have to increase a wastewater treatment plan or what have you, because I have to pay the increase in the tax when, you know, this development or whatever may be brand new, but they're the one that caused the increase in the treatment plant. But it is what it is. That's why we have impact fees. Unfortunately, those impact fees do not pay the brunt of what is really needed. And then my last thing is on slide 56, it looks like the water increase really isn't needed. It's just softening the blow a little bit, but we're over on both our bond coverage and our cash revenue ratio. So why are we increasing?
I can take that one. So what we don't show here is 2023, and we can follow up with those numbers. But that's when we see the surface water treatment debt requirements hit, and those ratios, at least the cash reserve ratio, you are at your minimum in 2023. And we can follow up with a memo that does that. But basically, what we're doing is trying to graduate up to hit that instead of staying flat and spiking up significantly in 2023.
Well, do we know that we would have to gradually spike up in 2023?
Yeah, there's covenants attached to those bonds that require us to keep that 25% cash ratio and then the bond coverage of 1.4, so that's a certainty.
Okay.
If I could, on the whole discussion, we'll expand some of those comparisons, and when we start to put this together, those other entities are kind of the same boat, but we'll make sure that if there's any changes in those other systems, we can update and reflect that. But we were able to deliver the 0%, and that was purposeful and rational based upon the numbers from last year. And bringing on the AMI and wanting to at least get our feet wet with that. The other piece that goes into this is this fund is dependent on the vagaries of the weather. We've had a soft sell year, so we haven't sold as much water as have in the past because of the rain, and that affects how much revenue we get in and drives all this. So if we have great, from the city's perspective, the utilities perspective, great dry summer next year, we'll sell more water. This will go down, and if the opposite happens, we'll go up. But that number, remember, Moore just pointed to those two numbers really drive this. There's not choice in terms of what we are obligated to bring in revenue. And in the forecast, we've been able to get these below the double digits. Council recall these were higher in previous projections, but this is the best information we have right now. And conservatively, we're showing those nines for the future, but we'll continue to work it and update that as we go along.
Councilmember Perez. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just one other quick thing. With the expansion of McHard, when we put that water line in over there, is that going to help anything with these numbers?
Good question. I don't know if Trent or Robert want to talk about like where we can buy water from, if that affects that, or when they'll come in service, or significant at this point.
Councilman Moore, with regards to the installation of the water and sewer infrastructure in McCard Road, that'll provide looping for the water line to be able to provide redundancy and augment service in that area. Also, with the sewer line, we'll be expanding in those areas that are unserved, so there will be opportunities then to be able to expand those services to unserved areas that are within the city still.
But I thought that was one of the whole reasons is that we would be able to supply more water to the west side of the city and not have to purchase so much from the city of Houston.
Councilman Moore, that's associated with the surface water treatment plant, and utilizing that new plant will be providing water to the west side and then reducing the demand or the need, or reducing the demand and the dependency on the 521 connection.
This is more of a system improvement, sounds like, versus what the other piece did on 521.
Okay, I just recall that was pretty much told to us that would help get us off of city of Houston water, but I guess that's only a piece of it.
Robert, is that right? Or?
That is correct. We'll always have a dependency on the city of Houston water, especially out of the Alice plant, coming from Southeast Water Purification Plant, where we're a co-participant in. Then, on the 521 side, we'll have a discussion as we continue reducing down to what our take and pay requirement is.
Our way.
No additional comments from what I had before, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Owens.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on that water rates a little bit, we're looking at 5% now, 9, and then another 9 after that, 24% increase possibly over the next 2 years. The whole point when we done the study to come in with the freshwater plant and to buy that area over there after 2 studies that said this is location for it to be in, we bought into the southeast plant into Houston, and the price we're paying for water on the southeast plant after we bought into it, we were going to run the line through McCard over to the west side, and we were going to discontinue the water that we're buying from the city of Houston over there, based upon every year is a yearly increase that we saw there to do that. And that was the whole point that we do it, that we saw that as an opportunity to do that. And in 9 years, we could pay for the cost of the engineering and pay for the cost of the construction to put the water line over to the fresh water plant. And So that was the whole point behind that we really had got into doing that part over there. But I guess on some of this, when we look at the funds on 6 over here on page 6, I mean, when we take the revenue bonds that we're going to have up until, I guess, 2030 and 2031, a minimum of $11 million a year on that as far as the principal increase on each year. So I just kind of feel like, seeing that this 24% over the next 3 years on the increase, and that doesn't even pay for bringing the freshwater plant completely online at that point in time. So, I mean, a lot more going to go into it on that. On the impact fees, I think, if you look at increasing impact fees, and we've done it several times, I think you have to look at the whole scenario. How does that affect business? Does it stop businesses from coming in, restaurants especially? The impact fees on a restaurant, if it's a dine-in restaurant, it's pretty expensive on there. But, I think you have to look at the whole picture rather than just saying we're going to raise the impact fees, on that. And I think, that needs to be looked at of different businesses coming in and how it would affect them. And is it enough to make them not want to come into Pearland? So the other thing, the last thing I have on here is with the freshwater plant, when it comes on, are we looking at the opportunity to come in and outsource that on a public-private partnership to get it not funded, but have people to operate it? I think we made a point a while ago of looking at people that you actually need in the water side of the business, and you're going to have additional, or people won't be able to take vacation, won't be able to take sick time, and what have you. I think, on something like that, we need to, before we bring that plan on, is looking at what it would cost for us to get the LCRA or Lower Colorado River Authority that does these freshwater plants all the time, and see what the actual cost would be. Because when we start operating that, we're going to have more than enough staff to run that in order to pay for the holidays off, vacation time off, or whatever, it's almost 1.5 times of whatever you have to run that plant. So I hope before we get to that point, that we have at least took a look at it to see an opportunity.
So in our staffing forecast for Public Works, it takes that into account. We've actually just hired, and they'll be starting here this month, our surface water plant manager. And then we've got a plan to bring on personnel over the next couple of years as we continue to develop the project and build the project, to have those key personnel that'll operate that plant on staff as we're finalizing design and going through construction. And then we're looking at some different options as we move forward as far as how we bring that on. Do we bring in an entity or a company that has operated those in the past for a period of time as we transition into fully staffing up and being able to operate that ourselves, or do we build that up as we go? So we're looking at those options, and those are built into Public Works' staffing plans for the next few years.
Okay, that brings up another subject on Public Works. I know the difference, between the enterprise fund and general fund. And I think in some of this, we looked at transferring some out of the Public Works into the enterprise fund. Are we splitting up some of the time effort on some of those people that we have in there now, where part of their salary comes out of enterprise and part of it comes out?
Yes, sir. So we take a look at that annually, and the personnel that spend time on both of those funds, and their salaries and benefits are split amongst the funds.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You had any more to comment before we get some comments from the audience?
I don't have anything else, sir. Happy anniversary, remember Little.
I think we pretty well have covered most of this. Item 6 said that we would permit public comments. Are there any public comments to this point? And I'll let Councilman Little.
Anyone from the audience other than Former council members like to make a public comment? Second time, anyone from the public like to make a comment? Third and final time, anyone from the audience like to make a comment, including former council members? No one wants to talk, Mayor.
No one wants to talk. But I know there's a lot of listening there. I think it was some pretty good interface with all of us. Clay, did you have any good wrap-up comments?
Great information, and appreciate the questions, and we'll spend next week, after we get through Monday night, getting information back to you. We'll send it out by Thursday, and then we'll be back at this, that next Monday, so.
Clay, did you feel like you had enough communication with the council about the looking at the study on the base rate?
Yes, sir, I felt like you were not alone there, so at least to explore that.
Okay. I think we've run out of discussion, so I will move to item 4, which let me adjourn this
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor.
council meeting. Thank all of you for being here. I think we're moving toward getting a consensus on where we need to go, and I think we need to realize that Pearland is a little bit different from most cities right now. Most everybody has their water lines and streets all pretty well locked up for their footprint. And we just sort of getting started primarily, so there'll be some fluctuations on numbers compared with other cities that have been around longer than we have, but I think we've done a superb job. The staff has done a fine job of making sure that we keep up with what we're doing. And who wants to speak? And then John Manson do a wrap up.
We're good, Mayor. Thank you.
Any other comments? No comments? Okay. Thank all of you for being here. Have a good rest of the